Evan Mercer noticed the charge while standing in line at a grocery store, holding nothing more than a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. The notification flashed across his phone like a warning siren. Charge approved. $12,700. At first, he thought it was fraud. He rarely used that card. In fact, he kept it tucked away for emergencies only. And the only other person who ever had access to it was his younger sister, Leela. The noise of the store suddenly faded, voices melting into a distant hum as he opened the transaction details with shaking fingers. The merchant name hit him like a punch of cold air, a luxury travel company that specialized in high-end island vacations. He stared hard at the screen, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something sensible. But they didn't. The more he scrolled through the itinerary, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a trip. This was a 5-star escape complete with oceanfront suites, private tours, and daily spa appointments. And the worst part? 2 names were listed: Lila Mercer and Adrian Clark, her boyfriend of barely 6 months. Evan felt the blood drain from his face. He placed his groceries on a nearby shelf and walked out of the store without buying anything. Rain drizzled across the parking lot, light enough not to sting, but heavy enough to match the storm rising in him. As he reached his car, he leaned against the door, gripping the handle, as though it was the only thing keeping him upright. He unlocked his phone again, staring at the number. $12,700. It wasn't just a charge. It was everything he had left after years of stretching himself thin to support both of them. Lila had always been the impulsive one. Growing up, she made decisions first and dealt with consequences later, though usually those consequences fell on Evan's shoulders. He had shielded her after their parents split, working extra shifts to cover school fees, groceries, and sometimes even rent. When he inherited their childhood home after their mother passed, he moved into a small apartment and let Lila live in the house free of charge. She had been struggling, or so she said. Adrian moved in shortly afterward with casual confidence, treating the house as if it were his birthright. Evan never complained. He told himself he was helping family, and helping family was the right thing to do. But this was different. Even Leela wouldn't spend nearly $13,000 without asking. And Adrian? He was the type who believed life owed him luxury, even if someone else had to pay for it. Evan had never trusted him, but he hadn't expected this. Not this level of carelessness. Not this level of entitlement. He sat in silence inside his car, listening to the rain tapping the roof, each drop marking the seconds passing as he tried to swallow the sinking feeling in his chest. His mind raced through memories, all the times he'd stepped in for Lila, all the times she'd promised she'd make changes, all the excuses he'd accepted. He wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, something explainable, something accidental. But deep down, a small voice told him the truth. She had used his card because she assumed he would always forgive her. He drove home slowly, windshield wipers swaying back and forth in a steady rhythm that did nothing to calm him. On the way, he passed the coffee shop where he and Lila used to sit after school when she needed help with homework. He passed the park where their mother took them for walks when life at home became too loud. Memories of their closeness pressed against him, tightening the ache in his chest. For a moment, he almost convinced himself that confronting her would be pointless, that he should simply swallow the loss like he had swallowed so many others. But the number kept echoing in his mind. $12,700. It felt like the price of every boundary he'd never set. When he reached his apartment, he didn't even take off his shoes. He sat at the small kitchen table where unpaid bills were stacked neatly, reminding him of the careful budgeting he'd done for years. He opened the travel company's website and searched the package she had booked. Pictures of crystal clear waters, sunset dinners, luxury suites, and private yachts filled the screen. His stomach twisted. The trip wasn't something someone booked by accident. It was the kind people saved years for. Not something they charged to a sibling without asking. He checked the booking dates. Their flight left in 2 days. That was when the shock began shifting into something else. A tired anger. Heavy, but controlled. He wasn't the type to explode. He rarely raised his voice. But this betrayal settled deep inside him. A quiet wound that hurt more, because it came from someone he had spent his whole life protecting. By the time he grabbed his keys and left the apartment again, the rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low. He drove toward the house. His house, though he rarely thought of it that way. The lights were on when he pulled into the driveway. The curtains glowed warm yellow, giving the home a peaceful look that felt painfully out of place considering the storm inside him. He walked to the door and heard laughter coming from inside before he even turned the knob. Lila's voice, cheerful and carefree, mixed with Adrian's deeper tone. They were packing. He could hear the rustle of bags, the opening and closing of closets, the excitement of people preparing for a dream vacation. When he stepped into the living room, Lila looked up first. Her smile faltered, though she tried to keep it in place. Evan. Hey, you're early. Early. As if he had been expected at all. As if he were interrupting something he'd been invited to. What's going on? He asked, though he already knew. Lila hesitated. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze falling to the floor. We, booked a trip, she said gently, as though the softness of her voice might soften the truth. With my card, he replied. Silence filled the room. Heavy and immediate. Adrian cleared his throat and stepped forward slightly, as though saving Lila the trouble of explaining. We were going to tell you, he said. It was kind of last minute, and your card was the easiest solution. You don't really use that account anyway. Evan stared at him, unable to speak. Adrian wasn't hostile. He wasn't aggressive. He simply acted like someone who believed the world was flexible and other people's limits were optional. That made it worse somehow. The casualness of it. Lila bit her lip. We'll pay you back, she said quickly. We didn't think you'd be upset. Everything's been really stressful lately, and this trip felt like something we needed. Needed. The word struck him harder than he expected. He needed many things too, rest, support, someone who didn't take him for granted. But he had never asked for them. He had always carried the load quietly. Lila, he said, his voice low and steady. That card was for emergencies only. She nodded, but there was a hint of dismissal in her eyes, as if she believed the situation could still be talked away. She had always relied on his softness, his ability to forgive before fully processing his anger. Adrian grabbed another suitcase and zipped it with one long pull. Look, he said, it's not a big deal. We'll handle it. Evan felt something break inside him. Not loudly, but sharply. It was the split second where betrayal becomes undeniable. He suddenly realized neither of them fully understood what they had taken from him. Not just money, but trust, boundaries, dignity, and the belief that family sacrifices were appreciated. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Arguing now would lead nowhere. Lila would apologize, promise change, and then fall back into old habits. Adrian would shrug it off as a misunderstanding. Nothing would truly shift. But something had shifted inside Evan, deeply and permanently. He walked out without saying another word. He didn't slam the door, didn't shout, didn't demand repayment. He simply left. Outside, the air felt colder than before, as if stepping out of that house meant stepping into a different version of reality. On the drive back, he didn't turn on the radio. His thoughts formed a quiet storm, but they were strangely focused. Instead of imagining confrontations or emotional speeches, he found himself thinking about responsibility. His responsibility to them, and his responsibility to himself. He thought about the house he had been carrying for years, the bills he'd been covering, the ways he had bent his life around theirs. He thought about how little space he had left for himself. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal burned deep, but beneath it was a realization he had ignored for too long. He had allowed this. By protecting Lila from consequences, he had unintentionally taught her that consequences didn't matter. By giving Adrian space to stay, he had told him his presence required no accountability. The charge was just the final crack. The moment the truth finally showed itself clearly, they hadn't done this out of malice. They simply assumed he would always be there to clean up the mess. But Evan wasn't sure he could do it anymore. And for the first time in his life, as the night stretched on and the city lights flickered outside, he felt something he had never felt toward his own family. The desire to walk away. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, out of self-preservation. And that was the seed of everything that would come next. Evan didn't sleep the night after confronting Lila and Adrian. He lay awake staring at the dim ceiling, barely moving, feeling the weight of a decision forming in the back of his mind. It wasn't a loud thought or a dramatic one. It came slowly, quietly, like a tide rising at dawn. He realized that he couldn't keep living the way he had. Something had to change. Not later, not eventually, but now. His whole life had been shaped around helping others, carrying responsibilities that weren't his, and smoothing over the mistakes of people he cared about. He always told himself it was kindness, but now he wasn't sure. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what would happen if he stopped holding everything together. Morning came, but it felt no different than the night before. His eyes were tired and his mind felt stretched thin. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he barely tasted. Across from him, a small pile of unpaid bills sat like a quiet accusation. Rent, utilities, a medical bill he'd been paying off for 6 months. He looked at them and thought again of the $12,700 charge. That money could have given him breathing room, a small break, a moment of peace. Instead, it had bought a luxury trip for 2 people who didn't understand the value of what they had taken. By midday, Evan made up his mind. He grabbed his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and called the real estate agent who had helped him manage the house years ago. His voice was steady as he asked about selling. He spoke calmly, but a part of him felt strangely hollow hearing himself say the words. Selling the house wasn't just a financial decision. It was cutting a tie to his past, to memories of childhood, to his mother's voice echoing through the hallways. But it was also a tie to years of stress, guilt, and responsibility that had kept him from living his own life. The real estate agent, a woman named Carol, sounded surprised but pleased. Of course, Evan. The market is strong right now. If the house is in good shape, I can get it listed quickly. He almost laughed. The house wasn't in good shape. Adrian had promised repairs more times than Evan could count, but the broken fence, peeling paint, and old plumbing had all been left as they were. Still, Carol was optimistic. Houses in the area sold fast. People overlooked flaws when the location was good. He set a meeting with her for that evening. As soon as he hung up, a new kind of tension formed in his stomach. This was real. He wasn't imagining it anymore. He was stepping into something he had avoided for years, taking control of his life, even if it meant hurting someone he loved. He drove to the house that afternoon to take photos for the listing. He expected to find Lila and Adrian resting between packing, but instead, the house was empty. The lights were off, and silence filled the rooms. They must have gone out for last-minute shopping, he thought. They were probably buying sunglasses or swimsuits, still excited for their trip, still believing everything would remain exactly as they wanted. Walking through the living room, Evan felt a wave of mixed emotions. The couch was the same one their mother bought when they were teens. The dining table had the small scratch mark Leela made when she tried carving her initials into it. The shelf in the corner still held the picture of them at a theme park, smiling with cotton candy in their hands. He remembered the warmth of that day, the sense of being a team, of being two people who could rely on each other when the world became too heavy. He placed the picture face down. He walked through the house with a slow, steady pace, taking photos of every room, every corner. He didn't try to hide the flaws. He didn't clean or organize anything. He felt too drained for that. The photos were real, and the sale would be real. For the first time, he understood that letting go wasn't the same as giving up. It was choosing a different path. When he left the house, he didn't lock the door behind him. Layla had a key. She would be back soon enough. Later that evening, Carol arrived. She had a clipboard, a camera, and a cheerful tone that didn't match the heaviness inside Evan. She walked through the house, making notes, asking questions. When she asked why he had decided to sell so suddenly, Evan half lied. "I need the money," he said simply. She nodded and didn't pry further. She could sense he didn't want to explain. As they stood outside in the driveway, Carol told him she could have the house listed by the end of the week. She talked about open houses, potential buyers, expected offers. Her words sounded distant, like they were happening in another world. Evan agreed to everything automatically. Just as she drove away, Lila and Adrian pulled up in their car. Leela stepped out with a bright smile that faded the moment she saw the "For sale" lockbox Carol had attached to the front door. "What's that?" she asked. Evan didn't answer immediately. He waited for her to come closer. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. "You're selling the house?" she asked, nearly breathless. "Yes," he said. Adrian stepped out of the car. He looked annoyed, not confused. "You didn't tell us you were planning this." "It's not your house," Evan replied, his voice calm. Lila stared at him, completely stunned. But this is where we live. You can't just sell it." "I can," Evan said. "And I have to." Her mouth opened, but no words came out for several seconds. Then she finally spoke. "Is this about the trip?" "Evan, we didn't mean." "It's not just about the trip," he said. "It's everything." Adrian crossed his arms. "So you're throwing us out? Just like that?" Evan looked at him without anger. "I'm not throwing you out. You'll have time. But I'm selling the house." Lila's expression shifted from shock to something softer, fear. "Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I can't carry everything anymore." That night, back in his apartment, Evan felt a strange mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt because he had hurt his sister. Relief because he had finally drawn a line he should have drawn years ago. For the first time, he wasn't bending his life to fix someone else's problem. He wasn't agreeing to responsibilities that were never his. But guilt still lingered. Lila wasn't a bad person. She had just become too comfortable with his support, too used to being rescued. Adrian wasn't evil, but he lived his life expecting others to make room for him. Evan wondered if maybe he had played a part in shaping them that way. Maybe by shielding them for so long, he had made it easy for them to assume he would always be there. Over the next few days, the house went on the market. There were showings, tours, phone calls from Carol, and a parade of strangers walking through hallways filled with memories. Meanwhile, Lila and Adrian tiptoed around Evan with a strange mix of apology and discomfort. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. They simply tried to pretend everything was normal, even though they knew it wasn't. Evan didn't confront them again. He didn't lecture or justify his choice. Instead, he focused on what came next. He paid off part of his debt with the small advance Carol arranged. He created a new budget. He applied for a job promotion that he had talked himself out of twice. He spent evenings reading in silence, letting his mind settle after years of noise. As days passed, he began to understand something important. Revenge wasn't what he wanted. He wasn't selling the house to punish them. He was selling it because he needed to choose himself for once. He needed space from the constant pressure of being responsible for everyone else's mistakes. Yet there was still conflict inside him, not anger but sadness. He loved Lila deeply. He didn't want to hurt her. Every time he saw her sitting quietly at the dining table, looking lost, a part of him wanted to erase everything and take her pain away. But another part, the wiser part, reminded him that helping her this time meant letting her stand on her own. 2 weeks after listing, the house received a strong offer. Carol called him late in the afternoon, excitement in her voice. "Evan, they want to close within 10 days. He agreed. When he hung up the phone, he sat still for a long time, staring at nothing. He knew this moment would come, but now that it was here, the emotions hit all at once: fear, relief, and a quiet ache that settled in his chest. That night, he walked to the house one last time before the closing date. Layla and Adrian were upstairs packing. The sound of boxes shifting echoed through the walls. Evan walked through the downstairs rooms alone. Everything looked smaller, emptier, as if the house itself had exhaled. He touched the kitchen counter where his mother used to cook. He sat briefly on the old couch. He stood by the window where he used to watch Lila walk home from school. Memories washed over him, not in a painful way, but like a reminder of where he had come from and how much he had carried. Then he walked outside, closed the door gently, and realized something. He wasn't running from the past. He was finally letting it go. The day of the house closing arrived with a grey sky and cold air, the kind that made the morning feel heavier than usual. Evan woke early, though he hadn't slept much at all. His thoughts kept looping through everything that had led him to this point: the betrayal, the decision to sell, the quiet days afterward. Now, the final moment was here, and he felt both ready and not ready at the same time. He knew the house represented years of responsibility he had never asked for. Letting it go was the right thing. But the emotional storm inside him refused to settle. He dressed simply, grabbed the folder of documents, and left his apartment. The drive to the house felt short, even though he took the long route. He watched the familiar streets glide past and wondered how many times he had driven home thinking only about work, bills, or what Lila and Adrian needed next. Now he was driving with a purpose that was only his. When he arrived, the house looked quiet, almost peaceful. The sold sign hung firmly in the front yard, and the weight of its presence hit him like a final confirmation. This chapter was ending whether he felt ready or not. He stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. Inside, he found Lila and Adrian in the living room, with several boxes packed beside them. They were leaving today too. Lila sat on the couch, her hands folded, her face pale. Adrian stood near the window, staring out with a tight expression. Maybe anger, maybe frustration. Evan couldn't tell. The moment you walked in, Lila stood. Her voice came out soft. "Evan, can we talk before the new owners come?" He nodded, though his stomach tightened. He knew this moment was coming, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and guilt. "I know we messed up," she said. "I know the charge was wrong. I'm not trying to excuse it. She paused, searching for words. I didn't think you'd ever walk away from me. Her voice cracked, and Evan felt a sharp ache in his chest. She wasn't being dramatic. She was speaking from a place of genuine fear. For so many years, he had been her safety net, the person who always showed up no matter what. The idea of losing that scared her more than losing the house itself. I didn't want to walk away, he said quietly. I just couldn't keep carrying everything alone. Adrian turned from the window. You could have talked to us instead of doing this behind our backs. Evan looked at him without anger. I did talk to you, he said. The night I confronted you both, you didn't take it seriously. You didn't think anything would change. Adrian opened his mouth to argue, but Layla placed a hand on his arm. Please, she whispered. Not now. She turned back to Evan. Selling the house. It feels like you're cutting me out of your life. Evan shook his head. I'm not cutting you out. But I need distance. For me. For you too, even if you don't see it yet. Leela wiped her eyes. I just wish you'd told me how much you were hurting. I didn't realize. He believed her. She wasn't lying. She had never been good at noticing the quiet pain of others, but she wasn't malicious. She had simply depended on him for so long that she assumed he was strong enough to carry everything. She never imagined he would reach a breaking point. Sometimes, he said, people don't realize something is wrong until the consequences finally show up. The room fell quiet. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. The new owners had arrived. Lila stepped back, her eyes settling on his face with a look he had never seen before, the look of someone who finally understood that life wouldn't always bend to her comfort. Before the new owners knocked, Evan took one more walk through the house. He went through each room slowly, feeling memories rise and fade like soft echoes. The kitchen, where his mother taught them to cook. The hallway where he taped up Lila's school drawings. The living room where they watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. Each memory hit differently. Some warm, some sad, some bittersweet. But none of them held him anymore. He realized he wasn't clinging to the past. He was simply acknowledging it before letting it go. When he returned to the living room, the new owners were waiting with Carol, the agent. Papers were exchanged, hands were shaken, signatures added. It all happened quickly, almost too quickly for something that carried so much emotional weight. When the final document was signed, Carol gave him a warm smile. That's it, Evan. Congratulations. He nodded, though the word congratulations felt strange. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transition, a necessary but painful one. After the paperwork, the new owners asked Lila and Adrian about the last few things in the house. They answered politely, trying not to seem out of place. It was clear that this wasn't easy for any of them. Eventually, the moment came when they all had to leave. Leela approached Evan again, her voice shaking. Can I ask you one thing? Of course. When we move out, will you still talk to me? Or is this it? Evan didn't hesitate. I'll always talk to you. You're my sister. But I can't be the person who fixes everything anymore. You have to take care of your life now. I have to take care of mine. She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes but not falling. She looked older in that moment, not in age, but in the weight of understanding. Adrian walked over next. He wasn't emotional, but his tone was softer than usual. I know we pushed too far. I'm not pretending we didn't. Just, I hope things get better for you. Evan appreciated that. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest Adrian had ever come to one. When they gathered their final boxes and stepped out to their car, Evan stood in the doorway, watching them go. He didn't feel triumphant or satisfied. He felt quiet, like someone who had made a difficult choice, and now had to live with the reality of it. As their car drove away, Evan walked to the empty street and stood for a moment, feeling the cool air brush against him. The house behind him wasn't his anymore. The years of responsibility tied to it were gone. He should have felt free, and part of him did. But another part carried a dull ache. Change, even necessary change, came with its own kind of grief. He headed back to his apartment, the drive silent except for the steady hum of the engine. When he arrived, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the couch, listening to the quiet. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about what someone else needed. He wasn't planning how to solve a problem for someone else. His mind wasn't racing with worry. Instead, he was thinking about his own life. The job he wanted, the goals he'd put aside, the peace he hoped to rebuild. He spent the rest of the evening organizing his space. He opened his windows, let in the fresh air, and cleaned the apartment from top to bottom. It was something he hadn't done in months. As he worked, he felt layers of old stress peel away. Each movement seemed to make room for something new. Later, he sat down and made a list, not of bills or responsibilities, but of things he wanted to do. Small things, big things, things he had forgotten he cared about. He wanted to learn guitar again, travel somewhere simple and quiet, apply for that promotion, take care of his health, rebuild friendships he had neglected. It felt strange to think about himself without guilt. The next morning, he received a text from Lila. "We're heading to our new place. It's not much, but it'll work. I'm sorry for everything. I want to do better. I hope you're okay." He stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "I hope you find your footing. I care about you. I just need space to take care of myself too." Her reply came quickly. "I understand, really." Evan set the phone down and felt a swell of emotion in his chest. Not sadness, not anger, something lighter. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The revenge he had thought he wanted wasn't about hurting anyone. It had been about choosing peace over chaos, choosing responsibility to himself instead of endless responsibility for others. Selling the house wasn't revenge, it was freedom. For the first time in years, he felt like his life was returning to him. Slowly, quietly, but surely. And this time, he wasn't going to give it away.